Good morning, rock stars. This is going to be a fun one because we are actually at home in my home studio space. I say studio space with a little bit of hesitation because it's kind of a multi-use space, but I think of it as my little she loft, and all my good and happy things are up here, including my sewing machine, and for today's purposes, my design wall. Now, I've done something a little bit different with how I've arranged the cameras today, and I have y'all stacked on top of each other. So my Instagram folks, you are up top. YouTube and Facebook, you are just below. And I did it this way because I needed both of you to be able to see kind of down this little hallway. We live in a townhouse, so a very tall, narrow house. So there are steps right here that go whee, down the way. Positioning was a little bit different this morning. So we'll see how this works out. Hopefully y'all are going to be able to see everything as I line it up here. Today is going to be a little bit different because since my sewing machine is over on the other side of the loft, we're not so much going to be focusing on assembling this quilt top today, so much as getting it laid out and talking through the positioning of those partial blocks. Okay. Now pardon me, Instagram, while I cut off my own head for a second. I'm just making sure I didn't miss any comments. I did not over on Instagram. Fabulous. I am going to grab my straight pins because I left them on my other tray. I'm going to grab my pattern. We're going to get our bearings together for a second, talk about kind of where we are in this quilt along and what is coming up next. And we're going to go from there. Good morning, Sharon. Welcome. All right, let me grab these pens. I had to take my Palazzo block of the month off the wall this morning, y'all. So if that's not love, I don't know what is. All right. As you know, we are here for our perfect fit quilt along. Last week, we made all of our partial blocks. The only error that I caught is the one that we discussed where I said left instead of right in partial block 2. So if you also caught that, there you go. Good morning, Christy. I am so glad you're here. So hopefully if you are making the throw size with me at this point, you should have all 22 of your blocks and your 10 partial blocks pieced. Today, we're going to pin them up on the wall, however much I can make fit on this wall. And we'll talk about kind of how this pattern offsets from itself, how those partial blocks square it up. And then we'll talk through a strategy for putting it together. Now, next week, we are going to jump ahead slightly in our conversation, and we're going to talk about quilting plans. We'll see if I have this puppy assembled and quilted by then, but there will be a resource coming out for y'all. And then remember, the week after that, there's not a Q&A because I am at QuiltCon. So that's going to be a catch-up week. So next week, we officially finish kind of the content of our quilt along. The week after that is going to be a catch-up week. Good morning, Margot. For those of you that are wanting to make sure you get everything all done. And then the following week, that final week of February into March is when we're going to have our virtual quilt show. And y'all get to see each other's quilts, which let me tell you, y'all have been posting in the Facebook group. You've been posting on Instagram. I've been getting to see them. They are phenomenal. And a lot of y'all have worked ahead, which I just love. Like you just got going and you were ready to get this quilt top together. So there's a little overview of where we're headed. I'm going to set this pattern down where I can look at it carefully as we begin to lay things out. And we're going to be off to the races, okay? As always, as I'm going along, please feel free to ask any and all questions. I'm going to come back over and check the chat periodically. I'm following the diagram that is on page 10 of the pattern because I made the throw size quilt, okay? And I'm literally going to go row by row, putting everything up here on the design wall. Now, I have a tray all the way down here that has my blocks and my partial blocks on it. I think my partial blocks got a little out of order, so that's going to be fun as we get into this. But we're going to start with our blocks. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks for the beginning of this. Let's put everything over here together. So row 1, we start with 4 blocks. These are felt adhesive panels that I have as my design wall here. I believe I'm going to link, I think on the how to make a design wall blog that was emailed out to y'all this week, which I will drop in my stories when we're done together. I linked to these. So they are made for sound dampening, but they also work beautifully. They also work beautifully as a design wall. You do have to pin to them. It doesn't stick super well without pinning. But honestly, there's a floor vent down here, so any design wall that those of you on Instagram can see the floor vent. Any design wall that I was gonna have up here, I probably was gonna have to be willing to pin to because of the breeze coming up from that vent. Plus, like, this is a fairly high traffic area. If you're coming up to the loft, you've got to walk alongside it. So stuff would be getting knocked down all the time. So for me, pinning it has not been a labor that I mind. And I really, really like that because, you know, they're that pressed felt. There's not a lot of like nap or anything on here. Like there are threads stuck to here from where I've had projects up, but I can take a lint roller and lint roll this clean, and it looks really sleek for being kind of in an area of our house that people see, right? We have a patio on the other side of this wall. So our friends come up and through this area a lot, so it's nice to have a design wall that is very aesthetic as well. Okay, there's my 4 blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I need partial block 1, and I'm gonna play the matching game to find partial block 1. That is laid out like partial block 1, but I feel, is that right? Oh, I put all of these on upside down. I'm so silly. Haha. I have had a bugger of a time keeping my colors straight because, as you know, this pattern is written essentially for 3 tones, a light, a medium, and a dark. And so it would make a lot of sense for my blue to be the dark and my pink to be the medium and the orange to be the light. But I switched the pink and the blue because of where I wanted the pink to fall in the quilt. And it has confused me the entire assembly process. So if you also played around with values and like the placement of values in this quilt and it has given you a hard time, fear not. You are not alone. Okay, let's see. Who else is here? Any other questions? Okay. How is this assembly going for y'all? Did you get all your partial blocks put together this week? Where are we at? Okay, there's that. Which now leads me to, okay, that's PB2. That's why I'm so confused. Partial block 1. Here you are. I had a moment of panic thinking that I messed up color placement on my partial blocks, but I didn't. We're good. All right. So you can see how this partial block, as I add it down here at the end, and you'll be able to see it more clearly on the rows that have one down here. It just repeats the pattern to a square, because as we start the next row, these blocks are going to be offset from one another. So the next one, we actually have partial block 2 goes up first. Like so. And you'll notice that partial block 2 is essentially a sliver of the original block, right? It is this chunk here, pieced so that it can stand on its own. So then as I put, hello, Sharon. Oh, yes, good. That's a bad question. As I put this next block up, they will seamlessly fit together. Right, so see how it's going to repeat, but then you'll see how these connect to continue the pattern. So that these have to be offset from one another. So when we sew these seams, these colors are going to continue so that the pattern crosses those block seam lines, right? So Sharon, as I mentioned, it's felt. They're adhesive tiles that just stick to the wall, which is delightful. I'm not necessarily worried about these visually lining up perfectly while I'm getting them on the wall, but I will make sure that I match those seams when I piece them together. Yes, and these are not, there is a major brand that makes felt tiles that markets to quilters. These are not that brand. That was not in my budget at the time that I was putting this wall up. I have heard wonderful things about that brand. But these are truly just marketed as sound panels and were much less expensive, which I appreciated. And like I said, there's a link on the blog, and I'll drop that in my stories. Okay, so next, partial block 3. I'm flipping back in the pattern to like cross-reference which partial block I'm dealing with here. Okay, I think that one's it. So partial block 3 is going to go up first on this one. And then we're only going to have 3 complete blocks. Now, if you look very carefully at your pattern, and this will be harder to see. Ooh. Is this partial block 3? Am I putting this in the right spot? This is partial block 3. It's just not going to line up perfectly because of seam allowances. I'm like, oh yeah, seam allowances are a thing. Okay. Oops. Because it's going to line up like that. No, it's not. I'm like, let me look at my pattern repeats from up above. Cross-reference, cross-reference. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong. You are not partial block 3. That's why you don't. Okay. You, I think, are partial block 3. So if you're not, if you are laying this out and you're like, my goodness gracious, this is taking me a lot of tries to get it right, that don't be alarmed. Me too, clearly. Okay, we're just gonna tap that down and let me get one more pin. So this row is only gonna have 3 complete blocks. And then we're gonna have another partial block at the end. We discussed last week how the repeat of this pattern is funky, right? And there's a lot going on. And getting everything to connect was a bit of a process during the design, as you can imagine. Thank goodness Hubster has an engineering brain. All right. Oh, y'all look so cool. Did y'all have this feeling of just like geeking out as you started to lay yours out of like, oh my goodness, the vision comes to life? Because I had done a mock-up of a similar colorway but different fabrics. So we're finally getting to see it for real. All right, partial block 4. Should be this one back here. So freaking cool, y'all. All right, then partial block 5 is a little one. Oh, that's what I was saying. If you look carefully at your pattern, you will see that on those layout pages, the partial blocks are outlined in red. So it may be tricky if you printed it at home, if you don't have a color printer or if you didn't choose to print it in color. But look at the digital file or look at your pattern booklet if you got the paper pattern. And those partial blocks are outlined in red to help you see where they fall in the pattern or in the layout. So it's a little bit easier to see how things are supposed to fit together. And the blocks, how the full blocks come underneath. You can see that breeze off my air vent blowing these. Now, as I get all of these up, if you have done other quilt alongs with me, you know I am a big fan of webbing my quilt top. So I like to take things off the wall and I will sew, in pairs down my columns and build out those rows so that I can then flip an entire row onto an entire row to sew it together. That will not work with perfect fit because these seams do not all line up. So for perfect fit, you're going to need to sew one row at a time and then pattern match with the row below it. I would strongly encourage you to sew row 1, pin it back up in your design wall, sew row 2, and then sew rows 1 and 2 together. Because if those rows start to get out of order, it will get to be a mess to try to put it back together again, okay? So truly take it row by row as you're assembling, and it's going to make it a smoother process. You're going to be less likely to get things out of order. There are some quilts that you can just kind of grab and assemble without having to see it. This one, it's very important that you lay it out and then assemble it thoughtfully, because if you switch anything, that pattern will break. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. One more. 4. And I might just barely be able to pin my whole thing onto this wall. If I was a little taller and had been able to start at the top, it would fit really perfectly. I think we're going to hang off the bottom a bit. I will say that is my one sad thing with my design wall. And my partial block 6. My one sad thing with my design wall is that I wish it were bigger. I've been in my era of making really large quilts, and only about a throw size will fit on this design wall. That is not a limitation of the tiles, it's a limitation of the wall. So we just cope as best we can. Partial block 6, partial block 7. Where are you? Are you partial block 7? I think you are. Okay. Oh yeah, we're gonna just barely be able to pin the bottom row at the bottom of the felt here. This is the other row that only has 3 complete blocks. So for, I guess is it every other row? No, not quite. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of funky. But pay attention. Most of these have, I think in the throw size, all of the blocks have, or all the rows have 2 or 3 or 4 complete blocks. But it does vary from row to row a little bit. So pay attention to that. As you're laying everybody out. I'm trying to use my pins to keep everyone from blowing too much too. You are crooked. Let's uncrooked you. Yeah, there. Let's see. 1, 2, one more complete block. And then partial block 8. Which some of these partial blocks you'll notice they're very close to being the big thing, right? Hello, Joan. It's good to see you. Let's see. Margo says I could not line my blocks up with having a label. I make labels with the small size Post-it notes and laminate them for reuse. That's amazing. I love that, Margo. Mine were labeled to a point, and then I did decide to kind of go rogue with the partial blocks here. It helps that I just pieced them last night. Like I was finishing them up. Actually, technically I finished 2 of them this morning because I miscounted my beads. Remember after a couple of pieces that I was like, oh, clearly talking and cutting like affects my counting. So I had another pair of B3s that I had to cut. And yeah, so it helps that I was like just piecing them. And these guys are just gonna dangle down here at the bottom. If you were on YouTube, I know I'm down here where you cannot see me. I apologize. All right, we know that these are what's left. So let's take all of this down to the floor. And then I'll tilt this for y'all for a moment. Whee! So you can see down here. Hello, welcome down to the floor. I need more than one pin. We need the whole pin cushion. All right, and we're gonna go across. Get everybody on. Y'all, I'm obsessed with this. It is so bright and so happy. If you are coming to QuiltCon, the hope is to have this hanging in the booth. If I'm really fortunate, it'll be quilted. We will see how far I get. I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 quilts, question mark, to quilt between now and QuiltCon plus 1 that needs to be pieced. So we're down to the wire because I leave in 10 days for QuiltCon. So we'll see. We'll see if it's quilted. The quilt top will be there, if nothing else. And there's always folks at QuiltCon that like to feel some type of way about me bringing incomplete quilts to the show. So, can't deprive them of their joy of questioning why I would do such a thing. All righty, there it is. Ta-da! All right, so hopefully this is helpful in giving you an idea of how to go about this process of laying everything out on the wall, bringing this to life, and then some thoughts on how to actually go through and assemble it. Like I said, next week we're going to talk about how to quilt perfect fit and begin to break that down. Then we'll have a week off, and then we'll come back together after QuiltCon for our quilt show where we can all show off our work and celebrate together. Thank you so much for joining me today, y'all. It has been fabulous to lay this out with y'all. And the next time you see it, it'll be a quilt top.